As I said, I really thank you for having tea with me today. I feel like we need to really start getting into discussions about how we can bring about sustainable change in our different communities. And I think you've done a good job with starting EWB-SA and collecting everybody. So I'd like you all to sort of introduce yourselves individually, and then we can start with tea.
So I'm Michelle Low, co-founder of Engineers Without Borders South Africa and Engineers Without Borders WITS, the university chapter. I worked as a lecturer at WITS University where I did my PhD and bachelor's in chemical engineering. And my PhD was looking at ways to improve the production rate of aquatic plants using carbon dioxide. Yeah, and then my career went through a different career trajectory, and now I'm working in policy and projects and looking at growing the medical tech and biotech and pharmaceutical sector here. So where I am working now, but it's been interesting the different career trajectories, but using my skills and because I really liked it what Wiebke said, as a student. So as a student, like when I was doing my master's converting to PhD at the same time, universities is like what you said, it's where you meet, right? People. So I actually went on a girl end workshop in July when they have their thing, and yeah, when they have their fellowship, I think the Girl Eng Fellowship or Women's Fellowship.
Yeah.
There we go, got it. The Women's Fellowship. And before I went, David asked in the office casually, "Oh, do you know if there's a volunteer organization for engineers?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And then I went away to this Women's Fellowship, and we were walking around in the communities, and we had to work with other um, people, like other fellows in a community project. And one of the fellows, one of the girls there was like saying, "Hey, there is Engineers Without Borders at UCT." I'm like, "Really? What do they do? Can they really help us with this project here that we're proposing for Women's Fellowship?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure. They're like volunteers. They can do all these engineering things." And I'm like, "I have to tell David about this when I get back to Joburg." So therefore, I went to Joburg and I told
Yeah.
David and just joined along on his vision mission to start up EWB Vits. And
Yeah.
then when Wiebke came along, yeah, went through with that too.
Amazing.
Enjoyed the vision and what she proposed, and yeah, the energy just went with that.
That's so interesting. I didn't know that Wom Eng was already there. Those UCT Wom Eng, then okay, EWB.
And
It's a nice story. Cool. It's an origin story. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So anyone else wanna go?
Yeah, I can go. I think Michelle did such a good job of explaining it. I don't have to spend that long on it.
Okay.
But yeah, look, my name is David Ming. I studied at WITS too. I was in the class with Michelle, so we studied together. Um, but I started up EWB, or we started up EWB WITS, then also co-founded EWB-SA. And I think my drive for doing it was when I came out of university, I realized that there's quite a lot of skills that you learn in your time at university, and growing up in a place like South Africa, you're always confronted with so much inequality and differences in opportunity and so on. So I felt like I wanted to try and leverage what I learned to society, and that's how I started. So coming out of university, I felt like it's got to be more than just being another cog in the wheel, I guess, and just getting your engineering degree and getting paid for it. So I wanted to find opportunities to do it, and that's where Michelle um, introduced these ideas of EWB and all of these things. So started from that, and then ever since then been involved with growing EWB-SA with Wiebke and the rest of the team. So yeah, that's a short intro to me, but yeah, it's been very, very interesting. Yeah.
When was this actually? This was which year? Just for some context.
About 2010.
2010. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, it's 10 years. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
Wow. Okay,
Ah,
I only joined. Yeah. So I guess I only started with EWB like 2013. So it was 3 years in.
Oh.
So you should go ahead. Whoops.
So my name is Wiebke Toussaint. I did my bachelor's and my master's at UCT. And my bachelor's was in mechanical engineering and my master's in computer science. And right now I'm doing a PhD in still computer science, artificial intelligence. But my real fascination is, or what I'm interested in, is machine learning and the Internet of Things, and basically how we bring the data and digital world or realm to our physical infrastructure. So I think of it as the evolution of traditional engineering rather than as something completely different. Um, and yeah, so the way I got exposed to involved with EWB was that in my third year of university, I went to do VAC work, as we do, and I thought, oh no, I'm not ready for this working world yet. It's not as exciting as I thought it would be. and and so I made the executive decision to take my 4 year degree to 5 years,
Okay.
so that I could really like leverage the opportunity to meet people on campus. Because I think universities are there's such a fantastic opportunity to meet other people that will be driving South Africa, kind of like your contemporaries. And especially like you're not only meeting engineers, you're meeting a diversity of people. You can meet lawyers, you can meet doctors, you meet people in arts, you meet people in accounting. So you're really exposed to different people. And after university, it sometimes becomes a bit difficult to kind of get that same degree of insights and access to people. So I wanted to optimize that and get involved in various social impact initiatives. A person that I knew, a colleague, had set up EWB at UCT, but they were quite an informal collection of students at that point in time, and they needed to formalize as a committee. And so I got involved, effectively setting up the first formal committee of EWB UCT. And then after university, after my bachelor's, I moved to Joburg, as we do, to start off as a graduate consulting engineer. And same days, I found myself a bit frustrated because I had a particular view of what working as an engineer might be like, and I found reality didn't quite match that. And so I guess I had dreams and desires of changing South Africa for the better, and I found day-to-day work was just day-to-day work. And in that sense, then realizing that the engineering sector might not, or realizing that I can't change the corporate world that fast, and realizing that or at that point in time, I wasn't considering working in government, which I now think everybody should. But EWB became kind of then an alternative option to say, hey, we can create an organization to live out those things that we don't find in the workplace. And so Engineers Without Borders became this avenue and this opportunity to bring together like-minded engineers that wanted to change South Africa for the better. And I think that's what always got me really excited about it. And yeah, the reason why I got out of morning in the bed is for the connections with like-minded people that want to create and shape the world.
No, that's amazing. That's really amazing. So if I were to summarize, it's David and Michelle were able to found or start the EWB VITS chapter, and then basically forming the first formal chapter for EWB UCT. And then at some point you guys met, and then you started EWB-SA. Well done on meeting, well done on on
I don't
doing
actually
that,
remember how we ended up meeting, but maybe it was a natural thing. Maybe I was looking out. Actually, no, because David and Michelle had emailed me at some point when I was running EWB UCT, but that slipped through the cracks. And I think it was only when I moved to Joburg I was like, hey, wait a moment.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like when I joined EWB, the first thing I was told is that I'm gonna have a story, like when I leave, like a story about like how I met that person, and then that person linked me up with that person. Literally, I have that exact story. So definitely a place you make friends, right? So I wanted to ask the first question, and maybe you've already alluded to some of this, but I wanted to ask, what is it that you actually wanted to change with your engineering skills in the world? I mean, what's the need that you guys were trying to fill other than creating a community? What was it that was inspiring the desire to have a platform to do something?
Yeah, I guess so. What wakes us up in the morning? Let's see. I guess, look, yeah, we all altruistic in nature. Yes. Um, it's like, I guess it's trying to, what that means is trying to use the resources and what we know and like our skills to help others while trying to also find a balance of life. So integrating that into like our work and our life and all that. So, um, I guess when David asked about EWB, and then I felt like his motivation, and then I saw something big in it, you know. So that's what kind of woke me up. Like, oh wait, like engineers can volunteer, and then but more from like not from the corporate perspective, like what to do after university, but from a student perspective, like I wish I had this as an undergrad. So yeah, I guess when Wiebke came along, it was what woke us up is to connect people. So therefore, like connecting the chapters so that we could function as a unit or a voice, and then also to encourage that collaboration between people, and therefore like encourage the collaboration between the chapters so they could learn from one another and how to do things, and then and what they could learn on doing. So it's all about a learning process and a collaborative process as well. And as you said, like Norma, like a story net, like you'll meet someone or network with someone. Yeah. But that wasn't like the outcome. The outcome was like, how can we help others and like, yeah, use our skills and connect people.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought EWB was going to be like Doctors Without Borders, and so I was like, I'm in. Because it was already, yeah, it was that simple because you guys had already started it, you know? Anyway, yeah.
You raised a good point there around Doctors Without Borders, because I think it speaks to a bigger thing that we do differently from other sort of similar organizations. But I think initially um, you do get hooked in because you think, oh, it's like Doctors Without Borders, but actually just replace the doctor with engineers, and you go out into like some sort of like relief type of situation where you're trying to just come in and save the world.
Yeah.
But you don't really realize that it's not like that in reality, and often that can be more damaging. So I think for me, we all start from this place of being, like what Michelle said, altruistic. I always felt like I wanted to make a difference, not necessarily, like change the world or be Superman and like revolutionize everything, but I just felt like I wanted to do something. So I still think that if I were to have studied in an alternate universe like finance or medicine or law or something, I might have done a similar thing, but it was actually engineering that I studied and what I was passionate about. And I always felt like, well, if I've got these skills, then how do I leverage them to actually do something more than just like get paid? So I think for me, it was really about like just trying to understand where I fit in society and how I can do my bit. Uh, but I think that's where a lot of people start, especially within EWB, and that's how you get hooked by it. And then, like through this journey, you realize how complex and tricky it can be. Even though we started in that spot, I think we all learned through this journey how we can make it better and how we can make it more sustainable and more impactful and effective. And I think that talks to why we are different to Psych A Doctors Without Borders, which is very much based on relief work. I think we much more education and things like that are much more fundamental to what we do. I think that's what makes us interesting and unique. It was just like this idea of trying to contribute a bit more, but I think it's become so much bigger than that.
No, that's like a great description. I always say that EWB-SA helps you manage your passion. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay,
So
you still have the question, right?
my question to you, Noma, is if tea
Yes.
with Noma is an opportunity to be marshmallow, like to be mushy and vulnerable and tell you the stories that you didn't get now.
Yes. I
Okay.
want all the juice and all the marshmallow and all the softness, all of
All right, okay.
it.
Much
So,
now we're brying. Hey, the fire has gone. Now we're really getting to those stories.
Yeah, think of it as we at a fire and we're having tea, and it's the time to have that chat now. So that's what
Tea
we're
and
excellent.
doing today.
marshmallows.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
and back to the question that you asked us is like kind of like what motivated the creation of EWB, right? I'm still
Yeah.
on the right track. Yes. So what I was going to start with is look at me, look at my face. I'm white.
Okay.
And so to me there was always a question of saying is I feel white in South Africa. So you feel like you're privileged. You feel like you've got access. You feel like I felt like I had opportunity. And so there was a very particular like, event that happened when I started working, where one of my colleagues took me to her village, and she wanted to build a library, and we ended up creating a book drive at our company, and ended up collecting some like about 50,000 rand to build that library. And so one weekend I went home with her, and kind of like she introduced me to her world there, Julia. And what really struck me on that over that weekend was realizing that I'm not Julia. Like I don't have a village community that I'm going to go to that I can change. And if I go to a village in South Africa, I'll always be the white woman that has appeared, and there'll always be like I won't ever be the people from that village. Um, and so I felt I was faced with two situations. I was faced with a situation where I could say, okay, this is not my problem. I'm stepping out of this. Or I could say, okay, but like, who is my community then, and where can I create change? And so to me, in the end, it came back to saying, like, I can, I can say that engineers are my community. And if I say that engineers are my community, it doesn't matter whether I'm black or white or anything else in between. Um,
Yeah.
and and so that kind of was the one side. And on the other side, I truly believe, and I still believe, that engineers bring development. Without engineers, a country cannot develop. And let's say now, as we think a lot about tech, we think a lot about internet, etc. Without electricity, without water, these things don't exist. Without road infrastructure and transport, we cannot live a modern life. And so it's really the services that engineers bring to modern life that creates development, because it creates opportunities for people to do what they want to do. Um, and so it was bringing those two things together. And so to me, then who was my community? My community, my personal community became, like, let's call it my village, became Engineers Without Borders, because I didn't have another village. Yeah, and so in that sense, I still believe that today is that without engineers, a country is toast, because it means you're not going to have electricity, you're not going to have water, you're not going to have roads. And those are really the starting point for allowing small entrepreneurs to create businesses, for allowing kids to go to school, for allowing people to go to work. And that's why I'm as passionate about Engineers Without Borders today, and about engineering as a whole. Because if we want to build South Africa, if we want to build Africa, we have to do it with our hands, and engineers lay the foundations for that.
Yeah, that's so true, Vips. You are you still there? Maybe you can try and explain to us how like your passion went from that to now a platform where EWB-SA, basically we got to a point where we agreed that our plan is to generate engineering knowledge, use engineering knowledge, and then transfer engineering knowledge. And we've tried to do that in multiple ways over the past 8 years. Firstly, I just want to know, like, do you guys think we've been effective? And what's been like the highlight of that experience? So if you can start.
I think we've been evolving. Um, and I think evolving is maybe more important than being effective upfront. So,
Okay.
I mean, EWB has always been all of us learning. And I think EWB will never set out to be the perfect organization. It never set out to do everything right. It set out to create a space where we can try and learn. And so, I
Correct.
mean, for me, being like, let's say, running EWB was the first time that I got an opportunity to be the CEO of an organization with a lot of people. It was the first time that I got the opportunity to organize a summit for like 30 people. It was the first time that I got an opportunity to create plans and put them into action. And I know that for many of the student chapters, actually for all of the student chapters, they've always been pioneers in their own worlds. And so in that sense, I think like we've always, EWB has often struggled to measure, or to define and measure effectiveness, because the learning has often been deeply embedded and integrated into the experience of the individuals. And so now I think if you go back to, like, let's say the 150 student leaders that really were actively engaged in EWB, most of them are really flying in their professional careers. And I think a part of that is through the experience and the learning that they gained through EWB. But also most of it was, again, self-directed. It wasn't Dave, Michelle, or I saying, here's a textbook and you figure out and you'll know what to do. It was Dave, Michelle, and I being absent and people figuring it out themselves and learning through the process. And so, I mean, that said, is like, I do think it's important to define what success means and to define what being effective means and to strive for that and to have metrics. So I think all of that is important. But I'm also saying is at like 22, I didn't know better, or we didn't know better. And so it was always a process of trial and error. And I think that process of trial and error is okay, and we should be careful of throwing it out of the, like throwing baby out with the bathwater, throwing out the experience learned through trial and error, just because we want to work according to a template. So like so I think where we've been the least effective is in sharing what we've done. And I think that's exactly what you're doing right now. So the nice thing is to know is there's a generation that comes afterwards that might be more effective at some aspects than what you were.
Yeah, the transferring also, like, the transferring of the knowledge and the experiences.
Exactly.
We're still around, so we've done something right. And like, so as much as nothing is perfect, we can always, and I think we always fall into this trap of benchmarking ourselves against other organizations, saying, oh, like they do this, we do this, how do we compare? And I think sometimes are quite hard on ourselves. We're around, and like we've actually grown and been quite agile in how we've pivoted from things. I've always been quite impressed at how flexible we are. And a couple of years ago, Wiebke and I and some of the directors were chatting about, like, what is it that makes us so different or unique? And I think that's where the resilience keyword came out of it. It was like this trait that we have when we go on an EWB type of experience, where you build this like industrial strength resilience. And it's almost, in a way, it's a double-edged sword, because things are going to fail, but then you try and adapt to it and change to it. And I think that's been really, really powerful for a lot of people going into EWB and like going on projects and all of those things. So I agree with Wiebke. Like, there's lots of things we could do and like how we can measure ourselves and all of those things. But I think in general it's been so successful, wildly different to what I ever thought it would ever be. And I think even if I look at the other EWBs around the world, they're all quite impressed with EWB-SA, like how we do things and how we operate and how we think about the world and our lens that we put on things. So I think we've been very successful in that. I mean, like, sure, we could do more and it could always be better and there could be more money and so on. But I've really appreciated the resilience aspect that we've managed to foster in the communities.
Yeah, that's actually quite a key one there with resilience, especially in 2020. That's the one trait that kept me going, like, as a leader in my work. And in fact, that word started like spreading after we put up the article, because we talked about resilience, results driven, and resourceful engineers. So it's quite an important trait, because if you think of what happened this year, we've needed people to be resilient to get through the year. Yeah, I agree
Can I
with
quickly
that.
jump in, because I think that this in some ways also represents an interesting transition in EWB, because we started off with this generating, using and transferring engineering knowledge as what we do. And over time, we then realized, well, those are all things that we would like to do. But in reality, where we really are at, what we can say we've done is help young engineers to become resilient, resourceful, and results driven. And I think for us, that was quite a realization to say, maybe it's more sensible to start thinking about ourselves around how do we really foster these character attributes in people who will ultimately be building the country, rather than focusing so much on generating, using, and transferring knowledge. And so that is still, I guess that might still be there a little bit, but I think over time we really migrated from the things that we do to the people that we want to nurture.
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. It's like we basically tended towards more developing those capabilities in the people as opposed to creating a system of any sort. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. And you, Michelle, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm just I'm thinking, yes. No, yeah, that's good.
That's cool.
I guess at the time, it like generate, use, and transfer knowledge, engineering knowledge. That's like was all about the strategy, like where we wanted to see EWB go towards. And I really appreciated those three parts to what we wanted to see where EWB goes. Yep. But then now we're like with this resilience, resourcefulness, and results driven. I guess that speaks to the impact. It's a good way in which EWB is measuring the impact of those three that were generate, use, and transfer. So I guess initially, when we were wanting to like start EWB, it seemed like we were using engineering knowledge to try and solve problems at the surface level. But that got us into the community and all that. So that's good. And we still want to use our engineering knowledge, but we want to use it more in a societal way. So then, therefore, it was more transferring that knowledge, which I think was good with the HCD courses, where we said every chapter should do it so that they could actually know what it means to have going into the community and asking them what they need instead of what we thought they wanted. So I appreciate that whole transferring knowledge to the students and the knowledge to the students from the course, but also from the community to the students. So that was a good aspect of transfer. But generating the knowledge, I agree with Wiebke, like capturing it via this technology of this platform. It's good. Like this YouTube video, that this tea of Norma, it's a nice way to generate, and like what the lawyers use, codify. So we're codifying the Engineers Without Borders South African knowledge and our lessons, so that, I guess I always like that quote, you can't always make all the mistakes in the world. Good to learn other people's mistakes. And also, like when you're all both talking about fail safe, I also appreciated that word, because you want a safe environment to fail, and then everyone is supportive of that. And so I remember when we all started in the beginning, like even as the WITS chapter and all that, and having team members, shout out to Laura, we didn't care what our positions meant. We just did tasks, what mattered the most, so we could progress the organization. So if we tried our hand at something, we didn't do well, then someone else would do it. But if we did well in it, would continue going for it. So it would just, it's a good place. And I think the students are still doing that, and it's reflected like that fail, and grow.
Yeah.
I think there's a
Go, Dave.
Added quickly, but I think there's a nice element of courage that EWB fosters in people. And it's very easy to say, like I want to go out and do stuff and I want to do something. And like I think that's where it starts. Maybe it does come from a good place, but then EWB has been a good place that I've realized to almost step back and say, like I don't actually need to do anything. I just need to have a bit more courage in what I want to do. And I think that's where we pivoted a bit to more of like the qualities that we want to try and foster in a professional engineer of the future in Africa. So that's my view of it.
I also wanted to jump in and tie it a bit to an ongoing discussion I've been having with a friend of mine, Eliswa. And it's a conversation around doing and being. And maybe as a precursor to that, I'll say is I think all worthwhile things in life are complex and have tensions, so they don't have simple answers.
Right.
And I think doing and being represents one of them. And it's maybe on a personal note, it's this question of when should you invest in yourself and build up yourself and kind of bring like kind of understanding that kind of self-healing and well-being and personal well-being and so on is really important. And when do you go out and act in the world, and which takes strain, which creates friction, which often actually in some ways, I won't say destroys, but it takes you out of your Zen space. And kind of can you go out and act and do when you can't be, when you don't feel healed and full yourself. But on the other hand, also quite often through doing, you become. And so there's this cycle between doing and being, and this tension that exists. And increasingly, I think it's not a linear thing. It's not that you first are and then you do. It's not that you first do and then you become. It's a constant cycle, and there's constant tension. And I think in EWB, almost that tension is resembled between projects and people. And so saying, like, do we focus on doing projects, or do we focus on building people? And if we only do one or only the other, can the organization exist? And I think we've gone through stages. So we started off doing projects, which was also this generating using transfer, and then we moved on to like focusing on people. But then eventually you have to say again, if the people don't go out and do projects, then is there a point? On the other hand, if you go do projects but you don't build the people, is there a point? And so I think this doing and being, this self and the world, this projects and people, is something where there's a constant tension. And I think it's important to view it as an ongoing cycle rather than as an absolute. And I think it's especially important not to consider, if we speak again about effectiveness, I think it's important to also realize where in that circle you are. And that, for example, if you've been building and investing in people, that you then don't consider yourself a failure because you haven't been doing projects. Or on the other side, if you've been doing projects, you don't consider yourself a failure because you haven't been looking after people. But more that you can say is, okay, what's the balance like? And do we need to shift that?
I like that, Wiebke, because I like, with you, what's it? Cos, tan, and sine. And then you have the cos graph going up and down. It's cos life. We just balancing between that. If I think about it, yeah, that's true.
I forgot I'm with engineers, Hey. Typical.
No, mathematics. I mean, everyone. Someone would use cos.
Hey. Cause. Okay, cool.
We're not going for a tan.
Cool. Okay, so I think maybe the next question I have is like, what were because you're describing it now, but what were the challenges of having to initiate a whole volunteer organization while juggling like full-on budding careers? Like,
I mean, I feel at that point in time, I'll just do a very quick one, and then we can have it like more dynamic conversation. I didn't really consider, like, there were challenges, but I felt the challenges weren't necessarily related that much to work-life balance kind of things, because I guess for one, there was less social media, so you wasted less of your time trying to write tweets and other messages, and you were much more proactive. And you wasted less time trying to look good in the digital world. But sorry.
trying to slay.
But now I lost my thread because I was laughing. But so and I think there's a part where when you're new to work, it's like I didn't have children of my own. I think at that point relationships were kind of like, I still had some time. So there were a lot of things that consume my time now that weren't an issue then. So I think quite often it felt normal to work on weekends. It felt normal to work an extra 3 hours on EWB in the evenings after finishing normal work. So I think like doing 10, 11-hour work days and spending weekends doing EWB didn't feel like extravagant, which now I guess it would feel more strenuous doing it now, I guess.
I agree.
Oh wow, thank you for the honesty, you know. Okay, cool. It gets complex after a while. Like the first 3 years after university, I feel like you have
Exactly.
enough time.
Exactly.
After that it gets very tricky. Like
It does.
Yeah, and I think it becomes about figuring out how to delegate better, and it's realizing is like, I think that's why passing on opportunity and leadership and really building the next generation is so important, because eventually you will run out of steam. And if you're not going to run out of steam, eventually you die. Like, that's life.
yeah.
And so if you don't train the people that are coming after you to do what you are doing, then like there's no sustainability.
Yeah, that's true. And that's so true because mentorship and sort of transferring knowledge is such a big component of EWB. And it becomes so informal, like how you get mentors. Like it becomes very informal because it's people that you work with on a day-to-day basis and you're actually learning skills all along. Yeah, until you solidify it. So
Yes, because there were two aspects to it. There was the chapter and then there was the organization. They were all happening at the same time because we were doing a master's slash PhD. So as a
yeah.
student, you had time. But then
Okay.
when we did the organization, it was working more full-time lecturing and then doing EWB. So I agree with Wiebke. Like we had the weekends, we had after hours. Um,
Yeah.
you have all that energy. Also, you have all that energy.
You're right.
Just use all your energy now. Below, like I mean, you know, those first few years after uni, just capitalize on that energy. You
Yeah.
see something, go for it. You have that motivation, go. Join someone who has the vision, and you
Yeah.
want to help them. Just collaborate and work with that energy. So, like, yeah, that's I had a lot of energy
Okay.
to
Cool. I
push
see.
things through, but also working with other energetic people, like, we didn't do it all by ourselves, like with the Wits chapter. I know Lara DeSantos was there as well. So it was
Yes.
working and pulling on other people that would help us through doing these other tasks that we couldn't do, and where you could pull it in. And I guess, yeah, it's if you also have a supportive work environment, that
Yeah.
helped.
Okay.
Because background as a lecturer, you evaluated on four things: on lecturing, teaching, on teaching, sorry, research, admin work that you have to perform at your university. But then there's a small proportion of like working in contribution to society. So lecturing at at a university in South Africa, they allow you to have time to contribute to volunteering. So we could use
Okay.
that time as well when we were not lecturing to just do something during the office hours.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Good times. I remember there was an office for EWB at the CHMT building upstairs there. I don't know how well that went, but yeah, we used to have boxes and everything upstairs. So
Right, yeah, you guys used to
yeah,
store all of the
yeah,
posters and t-shirts and everything.
yeah. We had yeah, it
yeah,
was
the Wits
exclusive.
chapter. Yeah, the Wits chapter, like, yeah, they managed in Richard Ward 5. They managed to get a little office there in that building. It was good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the city was stingy. I tried for years getting an office from them. Never got an office. So jealous.
Hopefully somebody sees this and donates offices to
I know,
our
and they're like,
chapter. Yeah, why not? Cool. And you, Dave, was your story similar to Michelle's? How did you find it?
I think I was a bit more highly strung.
you were also
So
working
yes,
on
Oh,
the
I mean,
farm.
I
you were at Witbank for a time.
oh
I was
wow.
uh,
Okay.
I was like a commissioning engineer for a bit and working long hours. So, I mean, I think you all realize that when you find something that's interesting, you get the energy for it. So I think just like Wiebke and Michelle, like we found the energy through EWB, so it never really felt like work. It felt more like fun, interesting stuff all the time. And when you're with other people, it just amplifies this energy and this interest. So if anything, it's quite re-energizing sometimes. And
Yeah.
I guess that's what the leadership retreats and all of those things ended up doing, is like you just around people and it makes you feel good, and that's why you're driven to do it. So I guess from the work perspective, it wasn't bad at all. And I'm still trying to figure out if that was just youth or some other things going on. But like the work effort was, I mean, like there was a lot of work to do all the time. Always, like got to organize this event, got to make this poster, like got to speak to these people and create all of these plans. But I always had big fears with the popularity. So I think most people, when they start something, they go, I want someone to look at my stuff, or I want interest. But we have never had that problem. It's always been too popular almost. And like I always had this massive fear. Like, what do you do with it? Like, how do you actually leverage that interest in a productive and constructive way? So if you go to and do a talk, everyone is always so interested. Like everyone wants to help. They all want to sign up mostly, and then they all just think it's like plain sailing. And from my side, I always felt like, what do I actually do with these people? So it felt sometimes like we were like building the train tracks as we were riding on it, and like you sort of just have to do what you can with what you have. And I think maybe it was just like a highly strung point in my life, but like I always felt like I don't want to mess up this opportunity of so many people wanting to help. How do you do that in a nice way? Like you could just say, oh, we're going to go and do something, like helicopter in a solution somewhere and then leave, but that's not the right thing to do. So like what do you do then when 50 people want to do that? And is it still the same organization that people think that they are contributing to if you tell them something different? So it starts to question, what are you creating, and is this actually what people want? And I think often we've hooked people in with pictures of people like getting dirty in some kind of like engineering situation.
Yeah.
And then they realize, oh no, it's actually about myself. I'm learning about resilience, and it's like I'm not actually going to save anyone.
Yeah.
The person that I'm saving is me.
Yeah.
So, and some people don't they don't want that. They want to actually just go out and get dirty. And I think I've always had this tension between those two interests. And I think starting up initially also, like because you don't have the history or like the previous runs on the board, it's difficult to actually say if what you're doing is right. Like for me, it was just constant fear of things just not working out because people just might not be interested in it after the first meeting or something.
I think that's always been an interesting journey of EWB, is that we've had this massive popularity signing up because everybody wanted to do projects, but everybody wanted the projects to be organized for them. And I think after signing up, people realized, oh, nothing is going to move unless I do it.
I was just saying it begins with me. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. It begins with me. And that's always been a very, I guess, strict stance that EWB used to have. And I think I always liked that stance because it's still my perspective. It's like if other people, like if you want to develop, you develop. If other people develop for you, they develop for themselves, and you may or may not benefit. And so from that perspective, I'm still a very firm believer that it begins with you. If you don't do it, nothing will happen. But it does come at the cost also. And I think, Noma, you often in the past, I often got the sense you were quite passionate about that. It sometimes comes at the cost of doing projects. Because in order to do projects, no matter who does them, where in the world, projects are difficult to do, whether they're small or whether they're large. And they require effort, they require planning, they require consolidation. And I think that's where kind of like on the one hand, if you want individuals to really drive and learn and pioneer, it sometimes comes like with this very high failure rate. But I think it's finding the balance here again between those two of saying how do we support people in their learning journey, but also manage to do projects at the end of the day to kind of have impact on communities. But I sometimes also think we had like the vision we had, like we think that I think it might be sustainable to do one or two good projects a year with a relatively large organization. I think we often wanted to do 50 or 100. But on the other hand, also then I felt really humbled because I think some EWB chapters did really amazing projects that were very, very local and didn't require much money, but had an impact. And I remember, like, to me, one of the most humbling ones was EWB UKZN when they started off. They did a food drive to collect food for engineering students that didn't have enough to eat because that didn't have enough to eat and it was exam time. And I remember in the beginning, I just saw it from the outside and I was like, oh, why are they collecting food? And then I heard the story from Pilani and I felt so humbled. I was like, wow. And like that is a project too. So I sometimes be a bit judgmental about or we think we want to do like the big, the shiny, the sexy. And it's really about doing deeply local, deeply contextual things.
Yeah, that's very true.
I
That's
want
very
to add
true.
one more thing on the effort, because I'm just realizing we didn't touch on that. And that is that organizing leadership summits is one of the most stressful things you can do in your life. And
I know that.
So I'm gonna have to put it out there to do justice to all the people who've ever organized a leadership summit, and to all the people who hadn't organized one but enjoyed one. So without a doubt, like those, like that was like being iron going, like organizing a leadership is like being iron going through the fire. You beaten, and you come out stronger on the other side. You learn a lot through it, but it's not easy.
Yeah,
I know Michelle did a lot of them. Noma, you've had your share.
Yeah, hey, that's yeah.
And it changes, it
Yeah.
evolves. The leadership summit is not the same as it was the year before. You have to build on it because you have people who like are so passionate about EWB, they are still in EWB, and like they have seen what happened last year. So how do you change it for the next year and make it more a better learning experience for them, but still having the essence of what you need to cover? Yeah.
Yeah, that is so interesting. In this year's summit, I literally thought the same thing. There was like maybe 4 repeats, and then everybody was new. And literally, like, yeah, anyway, let's not get into that. What I mean is, it does change every year. It genuinely does change every year.
But Norma, if
Okay,
you need
cool.
to, call me up. We can chat.
Okay, cool. I'll
But
call you.
I
I'll
don't know
call
how it
you
will be with
soon.
the pandemic, but it's like I
Mm.
always thought it was find the venue and everything falls into place.
Yes, that's very true.
It's
That's very true. And if you don't have a venue, your insecurities are very high. Like you just,
so
yeah,
high.
yeah.
You don't need dates. Yeah, good
That's
touch point,
true. That's
Wiebke.
true.
By the way,
No, okay,
at first
so
I didn't. Can I add on
yeah,
to the retreat? At first,
yes.
I'm not a camper. I don't like the bush, and but I
Yeah,
appreciate it. I so like afterwards, not appreciate. I don't know what the word is. Like I wanted the retreat
yeah,
in the away from Joburg, away from the CBD, like, or I wanted it to be isolated from us driving up and down. So I like the places where we stayed in.
yeah,
That's yes. So
yeah.
places where we could stay and not drive up and down, I liked.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as there were no bugs, I was just cool. Like, yeah, there's that issue, but yeah, otherwise, yeah.
But no,
I
you
definitely
like
miss the fires as well.
yeah, I
Yeah,
miss the fire chats. I miss the
yeah,
fireside chats, the stars, the
yeah.
benches, the peacefulness of the environment. Yeah, that was good.
Go
I was
ahead,
going to say
Viv.
there's a like I think what the summit's always brought out to or highlighted to me is the importance of having diverse teams with diverse interests. So I
Yes.
think in the earlier summits I always got my way. I was like, let's go to the bush, and I was like, bugs, whatever, let's do this thing. And I mean, I remember that one going out to Magaliesburg in the big 60-seater bus, taking 4 hours, going on some very windy
Yeah.
roads at night, arriving in a place without hot water, and arriving in a place
No
with
Wi-Fi.
screaming,
Oh
no
my
Wi-Fi.
God.
I remember.
Oh.
And I also remember, I still think that bred resilience. I remember how everybody like got up in the
Okay.
morning at 7 o'clock on the Saturday, and people were present. But maybe that was also just my my illusion. But then as the summit progressed, like later, Michelle was like a stop when I was like, no. So if the summits had gone my way, there wouldn't have been any sweets, there wouldn't have been any popcorn, we would have all been on a vegetarian diet. And Michelle eventually was like, no, 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 that's not gonna happen. So for some of the later summits, you can thank Michelle for the goodie bags and so on. And yeah, I think there's a niceness in having people with different perspectives. I think people would have hated, not hated, but yeah,
No,
different
we
people
really
bring different
appreciated the
perspectives.
upgrade. Yeah, no, we appreciated the upgrades. The changes were well received, by by all of us. I know by the last 3 summits we had hotels and everything was looking like a lot nice. And the students were a lot more comfortable. But I got to a place where I felt like, oh wow, if we were to take them back to the bush, they would never like forgive me. Like they would just feel like no.
But I mean,
we
so this question of comfort it's one of our, I think it's one of our challenges in South Africa is everybody wants to be comfortable. And what if life isn't comfortable? And I mean, I don't have to tell you when life is uncomfortable because you've got your own experience of it. But somewhere like it's like life itself is quite often not comfortable. And if we always only do comfort, it means we never go back to do the changes that need to be done. So sometimes you also have to get out of our comfort zone. And I think that's an aspect where I sometimes think is getting out of what feels comfortable and realizing that you can actually do it. It's the same as running a marathon. You're like, you're going to be in pain. But then you realize, flip, man, my body could do that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. I don't know, I'm being like, yeah, no, give me the hotel.
But there are like these tents where you can camp and be comfortable.
Glamping.
So yes, glamping. So consider that, because I do think I liked, you know, if you could rotate between, you know, you breathe in and you breathe out. So every alternate year for the repeats. So we're going on this. We should be talking about this on another place. You could go urban and you know you could go bush. So I'm just putting that
like
there.
just to have a blend of both.
That's very
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Breathe in and out.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yes.
Thanks.
There's quite a nice spot I want us to try next time when the COVID is over. So maybe if you can share with us what direction your career path has taken, and if it's still closely linked to the passions that you had, you know, at the beginning when you wanted to.
I wonder if
Cool.
you how you would answer that question too. Hey, Norma.
Yeah, so I would say definitely like I've grown up in a situation where empowering communities was very important. So EWB was a very generic move for me when I got to university. But I wasn't conscious of what I was doing. I was just doing EWB work because I felt like I needed to do that, and you know, and then I just started like unconsciously carrying on with it. But now that I've like had time to myself to think post university, I'm realizing how closely linked it is to what I actually want to do with the world, the greater world. So in in terms of my career path itself, I'm still I work in the rest of Africa, and it's quite a community orientated environment. Like each different type of tribe is a different community, and for you to penetrate them and be able to do business with them, you actually have to do a lot of human centered design and a lot of individualization of solutions. So for me, it's quite yeah, I like it's quite well aligned. I don't know. What do you? Maybe you guys can tell me about your experiences, but I'm finding it more and more aligned, even going into the future. I mean, there was a summit where I used to talk about my flowers, you know, and I was telling the students about, you know, gardening and whatnot. And then I saw this year a lot of the students, their projects around agriculture, and a lot of them have partnered with like other organizations that are already doing, yeah, like, which is just so much bigger than what I could have. I was just talking about my garden. And then they've, yeah, so now they've given me such big ideas. I'm like, yes, yes, definitely. You know? Yeah, they do their some of their human-centered design well, their design courses around gardening and like getting pump systems. And it's quite amazing because in the previous summit we were talking about the water, the food, and energy nexus, which are some of Africa's challenges. So I'm really excited about where EWP is going and where how well aligned I've managed, you know, to have it, especially with my actual work. So yeah, maybe you guys can tell me where you are, what's happening.
So in some ways, I think I'll make a bold statement that I think it'll be impossible for me to have a career that I enjoy without it being aligned with EWB. I think in reality, the way that alignment kind of manifests itself changes over time. And so I definitely had last year, now 2 years ago, so beginning of 2019, I definitely had a strong sense that I needed a bit of a step away from EWB and actively organizing, basically being an activist, like organizing, convening, managing, delegating work, finding people, motivating them. And I'd done that for a decade, and I just needed a break. And so for me to go and do a PhD, I feel that to me has always felt quite self-indulgent, because it means that for 4 years, I am not responsible for anybody. I'm not accountable to anybody. I don't need to think about anything other than what I want to think about and the outputs that I'm writing. I mean, I'm making a PhD sound easy. It was quite a challenge, but a PhD is a very individual project. And I'm also quite conscious that the in some ways isn't. So my view is South Africa should focus on the first, second, and third industrial revolutions and ignore the fourth, because if you don't have electricity, you can forget about computers. So in that sense, I feel what I'm doing isn't the most, like, I don't think South Africa should be thinking about smart cities and smart grids. Or no, that's wrong. I think South Africa should be thinking about it, but they need to have their own vision for it that doesn't align with how Amsterdam or Berlin or London is doing it. So again, from that sense, I feel there is a little bit of a disconnect. On the other hand, I think it does filter through in other ways. So I definitely feel that computer science as a discipline, and particularly artificial intelligence, are miles behind engineering when it comes to like understanding how design impacts users. And with the traditional engineering, it's so obvious, because you see a road dividing a community, you see people not having water, you see people not having electricity.
Yeah.
But with AI, and so I think there's a lot of my experience from Engineers Without Borders that I'm trying to bring into the research that I'm doing. Again, from a perspective of saying, what does it like? How does design really impact the experience of technology? And that to me is, whenever I get confused about it in AI, I think back to it and say, okay, remember what it looks like physically in engineering. So that's the one. And then the others, I'm becoming increasingly, again, it's like this, I guess, this mentorship and transferring knowledge through generations that I'm still very much connected to as a narrative. And I think as an academic, and as somebody who's wanting to go back to academia and teaching, that is definitely featuring quite strongly in how I view my career. So saying, how do we build the next generation of engineers? That's something I still want to do. So in some ways, much less activist, much less mobilizing and moving, but definitely still very, very strongly rooted in the how does design affect people? How do we design for people? And how do we build the next generation of engineers in South Africa?
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. Dave, wanna go next?
Yeah, okay, you're putting me on the spot. Like, it's actually hard to think about your own career sometimes, I think.
Yeah, because you do it every day. Yeah.
I always thought that I was more of a public servant than anything. So when I came out of university, I did a PhD, but I was actually doing EWB as well at the same time. And then after that, I worked for a water company in like rural Mpumalanga, trying to clean up acid mine drainage, and always thought that was a very good use of my skills for society. And then from that, I got an opportunity to teach. Spent many years in a teaching role and like a transferring of knowledge role. And during that time, EWB was always a very prominent thing, and I guess it's what's made me who I am. And so then I think after that, I always felt like if I do continue down this path, I'm going to feel almost one-dimensional, like this is the only thing that I can do. So for me, I had to take a break from it too, just like Wiebke, not necessarily drive it so shallowly in terms of I'm actually doing the work and whatever, but really just trying to understand what skills that I learn in that space that I can apply in a bigger domain or a different domain. So I also transitioned a bit to analytics, and I think I'm seeing it too with what Wiebke's referring to in like machine learning and AI. There's like a lot of perceptions about how it can be used, and often it comes from a certain industry or view of the world. And I think I will never be like a computer scientist. I won't ever be like some sort of statistician or like mathematician or whatever. I'm really like an engineer, so I'm trying to use those skills now to be a better applying them in this new domain. So again, I think I'm not necessarily in a non-profit space where I'm doing these things day to day, but I think the qualities I want to impart in these new careers is driven mostly from what I've learned from engineering and EWB. Don't think if you had to look at what I do now, it doesn't look like I'm doing much, but I think there's a lot of qualities that I've learned along the way, especially like the teaching and the human-centered design and thinking about things holistically. That's been fundamental to how I view the world, and I think that's what makes you like a very interesting professional when you go into these classically like regimented domains of like maths and science and so on.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
yeah.
Oh no, that's an amazing perspective. I like what you said about being a public servant. That's a different rate of view.
I have to say that.
Like it.
Yeah, we were founders, right? And we started working on this hard. Like we started putting in a lot of thought and actually implementing our thoughts in the initial years. And then we started passing it down and letting everyone take over and evolving EWB, as we say. So with that, because with EWB, I think when I listen to Wiebke and David, it's like we carry the culture of EWB with us. And I think all the EWB-SA alumni also carry that culture with them, where they were applied in their work, in their place of work. So that's where I'm going to be talking about my perspective as an EWB like volunteer and founder, but just someone who was part of Engineers Without Borders at the time of its like inception.
Inception.
So, yeah. So yeah, I guess with lecturing, it's always passing on skill, passing on knowledge, and then with my career movement, I guess I'm evolving. My career is a process of evolution as well, just as EWB is. And there's chapters in my life, you could define like my work to be in chapters like lecturing, PhD, lecturing, and in between with the foundation of EWB running in the background because it was like a volunteer work and doing it after hours. And so trying to find a way in which you could, if you don't have enough time, that youth, to do it after hours, like how do you find that in your place of work? And it's, I guess it's also where I'm working now, it's like in policy work or project work too. And what Wiebke mentioned when we first started, like seeing the role of engineers in government, yes.
Yes.
I'm seeing that, and that's needed. And like, as my career, I've never saw that before. But as engineers, but also as academics, we should be involved in the conversation of what's going on to help with what's happening in whatever government area we are in. So. What was I wrote here something? Yes, Wiebke, you wrote design. How will engineers go in and design and make things? And how would we contribute to what Norma you spoke about at the summit with the water, energy, and food? Yeah. So researchers, engineers, they do the work in water, energy, and food, and we can design. But then, so where I've been working, I've been seeing academics with their research contribute to policies through their research, and then those policies will influence how the community or even the organizations or engineers work in that space. So I've been fortunate enough to see that from that perspective, but also still allow EWB culture within me as I work, as David goes within our work. Yeah. So but also I managed to volunteer with Engineers Without Borders Australia here when I came here too.
Amazing. Well done.
Because I wanted, when you move, you feel disconnect, right? So I wanted you want to start with places that are familiar, with places that you trust. Even when we started EWB, like someone told David, like when he was initiating it, getting signatures, start with people you trust, and then your network will build. So like I started with Engineers Without Borders Australia here because we heard about them when Engineers Without Borders South Africa is connected to EWBI, and there's these international conferences, but then we at least knew someone at engineers here. EWB Australia. It's such a long. Sorry, you're going to cut that word out. But yeah, so
Yeah.
it was good to find a space where you could connect, and there I was like understanding, just volunteering there in that space, and to see the kind of energy you need. And this is just from a perspective of like, oh yeah, they're doing different things from EWB South Africa. Here it was just organizing events for members, giving them information sessions. So it was an easy flow, but it wasn't, because they were already established. It's not like what happened with EWB-SA, where you still need to, you're still evolving, you're still finding your voice, and we're still like,
Correct.
you want to, every single step you take, it's like push more, because in South Africa there are still, what you said, like Wiebke, you need to focus on Industrial Revolution 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so
Yes,
we need to
correct.
it's just answering the question. I actually lost track of.
Yes, it is.
I
It is.
wanted to add something which is where a major shift for me has happened over the last 10 years, is understanding how much change can happen at a local government level. And so basically having engineers work for provincial, or having dedicated, passionate, compassionate engineers who are both have high technical competency and a deep desire to build South Africa, having them work at a local government and a provincial government level and national, but like more on the local scale. And so in municipalities, whether they're rural, whether they're urban, in the metros, in the districts. And I think that's something I'll blame our education system, like across the universities, for that, because I was never exposed to the possibility of working for local government at university. So I thought the only option that I really thought about was working for corporate. And it neglects that engineers are drivers of local government. And I think local government has been very poor at promoting themselves as a good employer.
Correct.
And I think
but they need us, honestly. They need the information.
They do. Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's like, if let's say coming back to South Africa, I think there'll be a very strong consideration of working. Like as you go through your careers, you also you move in at different levels, and again, like the way that you can contribute based on your experience and your skills changes over time.
Correct.
And I loved hearing both in David and Michelle, and actually also knew these. I think this term evolution is quite strong in EWB, that like both in the people and in the organization, that things don't stay the same, and they shouldn't. Because if we're still talking about the same issues we talked about 10 years ago, it means we haven't moved forward. And so I think we move forward as individuals, and our perspective changes as individuals. And I think the same goes for the organization. And I think that dynamism is beautiful. It also means it's uncertain, unstable. It means it sometimes feels really good, other times feels a little bit less good. But so do our personal lives. Like you don't always feel fantastic about where you are in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you won't be here every day. But there's a foundation to it. Like you might not know what the end looks like or whatever, but like in a direction you would kind of help yourself to guide when making your decision, as the AI, would.
No, it's true. Yeah, and also actually, like one of the things I've been doing now quite intentionally over the last year is volunteering with different organizations. So just to get a sense of how other organizations are run. So I volunteered with one which I felt like wasn't me at all. So it kind of was very, very dogmatic. It had like boxes in which you can fit, and I was like, oh, I thought I was allowed to move here, and all I'm allowed to do is this little section of work like this, but the action is like this. So there was one, and then I found another organization, Mozilla, which I really, really enjoy, and I think there's a lot that can be learned from spending some time out of. So let's say for me, leaving EWB, spending time with Mozilla, understanding how an organization that spent 25 years building an open community runs itself, and being like, oh, they do some things that are so cool. I wish I would have known about that when we were organizing summits or when we were setting up EWB. And I think there's value in going and trying different things, and also then bringing it back to home, bring it back to where you come from.
True. That's true. I always say that you learn a new app every time you enter an EWB call or something. Yeah, the other day I learned a new one. I learned Mural. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Miro,
Just to
Oh,
be
the
brainstorming one.
yeah,
I was thinking,
yeah,
Wiebke, you would like that one, wouldn't you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Ish. Okay, cool. Happiness. We have one last question, and I think you guys have already answered this question, but I would like to get your final word on it. Um, it's basically, what role do African engineers have to play in the sustainable development of the continent going forward? I think Vips has already said her piece just now. Yeah.
I don't know.
When you were answering, I was like,
I want to say
yes.
another piece.
Okay, please
No,
feel
I don't
free.
know.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Who's going to start? Are you
All
going to
right,
start?
yeah, I'll go. So I'm reading your question. What role do African engineers have to play in the sustainable development of the continent? Okay, of the
Yeah,
continent.
going forward. Yeah, of
Well,
Africa. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so we need to be more active, right? So I guess sustainable development, it's from the ground to the government and then
Yeah.
back. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's this whole circle. It's there are a lot of players in this circle, this Venn diagram, and
Yeah.
engineers who are experts in their field and who are interacting with their colleagues and the community should because contribute to policies being developed from government. So like so this is from my point of view. So yeah, so like for the academics and for people who know what's going on in the community and knowing what's going on with their technology, should contribute to like say, which I never knew about, but I've learned about it here, is about like commenting on what do you call it, government submissions. So when Parliament issues out submissions and they ask for comment, and it's something
Correct.
like there's a new one that's out that I saw. It's on waste streams. Us engineers can comment on that. What do you think? Are they talking about there? So it's good for engineers to contribute to government submissions so that the government can see knowledge from the thought leadership that's coming from the engineers and go and consider that when generating their policies. So even though they're not in government, some engineers or academics, they can still contribute by submitting their thoughts to these formal processes that are in place within the the lawmaking process. So that would be good. That's one part.
Yeah.
think with Ken David could add more to that.
Amazing.
I can go. And Wiebke can finish off.
Finish off.
Yeah. Look, so I mean, I think it's so fundamentally important that African engineers play their role in developing Africa. I mean, and I think EWB has. I've always found it very inspiring to see how it's so important to have local context driven solutions that aren't just like something that you like, get off the internet or something, but it's things that you really understand and you can really appreciate. I've always felt like if a comet were to hit the Earth, you'd really need like farmers, doctors, and engineers. I mean, like that. Those are to me, the three fundamental disciplines of society, modern society. You can have lawyers and other things too, and I'm not discrediting their professions or anything. And I
Yeah.
suppose I am doing this because I am an engineer too, but
Yeah. Okay.
fundamentally to society, you need to eat, you need to be healthy, and then you need
Yeah.
to have infrastructure to do things before you can do anything else. And so engineering is so fundamentally important to that. And I think Africa is in many ways like a final frontier in terms of opportunity and development and potential. And so it's so important, I think, that African engineers take the reins of developing Africa more than anyone else. And it echoes what Wiebke said. Engineers should be going into places of influence and where you actually have a buy-in at the decision-making table. It's not just about being the nerd that does all the mathy stuff and builds the thing. It's about having the brain and the context and the vision to influence society, and to be in a position where you can do that. So that engineers are in society, but it's also important that engineers are in decision-making positions to grow Africa as well.
Honestly, I really like what you said about local context-driven solutions because oftentimes, I mean, that goes back to human-centered design. I quote HCD like in all my meetings because but it's important. Like when you actually talk to people, you learn so much. Even in the marketing context, you just learn so much about your customer and your clients, and just by doing that, the solution that you come up with is so much more tailored to what they need, and that alone is, I think, very critical for growing Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like if you think about it, would you like that's the only way?
Yeah.
You'd obviously want
Yeah.
to know who you're developing something for, and I guess it's easy to say that, but to truly appreciate it is another thing. Like so people always say, "Oh, customers, like the customers first, and speak to your
Yeah.
client." And like so
Yeah.
people know it, but do they really?
Yeah,
Um,
users.
Yeah, and you'll be surprised if you just dig a little deeper what you learn. So yeah, absolutely. No, I also want to say that a comet did hit the Earth in a way this year. So we had a lot of doctors were active, a lot of engineers still needed to keep the power running. And just like you said, so yeah, we did have a comet of that nature, and it just showed us like again like how important engineers are in the grander um, scheme of the value chain, like comes to food, even how like some of the facilities in South Africa actually changed their factories and started like manufacturing some some hand sanitizer and masks and things like that. There was a real like effort from engineering to support medicine, which was also like, you know, I don't know if it was well supported by the government or not, but that's, the grander environment that we're working in. Yeah.
I think like
Okay.
engineering is problem solving. So we're really
Yes.
good at that. So that's why
Yeah.
we need to solve more. Like there will be a sequence of problems that will need to be solved in the future, and engineers, just by their training and how they think, is very good for that.
Can
Definitely.
I add, like the two things that I want to add? I want to add to what David has been saying about fundamentals, but I
Yeah.
also want to add, I want to unpack a bit what we mean when we say sustainable development, because I think we
Yeah.
use terms like that often quite easily on a conceptual and abstract level, but we don't really like
Unpack it.
just stop a moment, because what we're really saying is how can engineers help create an African continent that is livable for its people, in which the
Yeah.
environment is kept alive, and that can adapt to a context that is dramatically changing. For one, because it's always been changing, but also because climate change is hitting us hard or going to hit us harder. And so really it's like, forget saying sustainable development. It's about how do we create a continent that is for its people, that that keeps the environment intact and that is adaptable. Um, and then if you start saying, so then let's start coming to fundamentals. What does it mean to have a continent for its people? And so they start saying, what does for its people do? People need to survive as individuals, and people want to connect as communities. Surviving as individuals, like David was saying, is like what we need to do is eat, breathe, have shelter,
Yeah.
basic human needs. So you
Yeah.
need farmers, you need food production. But
Yeah.
in food production, like you end up producing a surplus and you end up having a degree of specialization. So we need to have, and this comes to community, we start having trade. So we need to start saying is how do we do food production? How do we enable trade? Trade
Yeah.
requires infrastructure because you need to
Yeah.
start moving goods. Also, trade and food production require electricity because you need cold storage, because you do cooking, etc. And
Yeah.
so we really have to start, like, I think it helps moving away from abstract concepts like sustainable development and start saying concretely, what does it mean?
So
Um,
food, water, and power.
Food, water, power,
Essentially.
transport, but actually saying, like, I
Transport,
prefer even looking at it from a human perspective, saying is
yeah,
we need to nourish ourselves, we want to communicate with each other, we want to
yeah,
trade, and that's basically it. It's like the world can be reduced to like some very few things. It's like access to
yeah,
resources, fighting over resources, trading
yeah,
resources, um, And so then saying, why do we need African engineers? So kind of where we stuck at the moment is that African engineers are lacking from so many spaces. So we sucked into corporates, and we sucked into or lured into wanting to create sexy high-tech businesses, when ultimately what we really need is we need engineers in government or local government, because that is the space in which you create government has the function of creating an environment in which other actors can meet their functions. And so engineers in government roles mean that they create the foundation on which everything else is built. And then we need engineers grabbing opportunities, and opportunities, like, I think we often get innovation and R&D wrong. We think we need to create these like crazy things that have never been done before. But entrepreneurship lies where the obstacles. Engineers in Africa need to go to remove the obstacles that people, like ordinary people, face on a day-to-day basis. And obstacles are things like spending a long time to get energy, spending a long time to get water, spending a long time to
I
move.
can give you an example, Vibs. I was visiting like my granddad's village last 3 weeks ago, and basically they only get water on Thursdays, and they have a communal tap. Maybe let's say 6 houses will have one communal tap, and the water comes on Thursday. But then they have like a Jojo tank, and they have a lot of rain. So it's like they usually use rainwater for all the activities. But none of them have flushing toilets. None of them have like, you know, anything that's like plumbing related into their houses, simply because they don't have a pump that can move the water from, the Jojo tank to flush. That's what I realized. I realize that because I'm an engineer, but people like they're just living in that situation, and they feel like, no, maybe the pump is too expensive for one house, or they haven't thought about it, or what. There's a lot of like constraints that they worry about, even just the contamination of the pipes and stuff. So I get what you're saying. Like if we were in those communities hanging around, because we are flushing everything in Joburg, like everything looks so good. But when you go out there, there's like very minimal things that you can do to tweak like their current way of life, and just enhance it if they want it to be enhanced.
And obstacle is opportunity. So I
Yeah,
think that's what we need to be much more directed towards, because it's the structures. Like we need African engineers to do it, because unless you live in a place and you're connected to it, you are not really invested in its future.
Yeah. And you don't understand the challenges maybe as well, as if you have like been there, literally, like if you had the exposure. Thank you so much for coming to Tea with Norma. Thank you for all of your very candid responses. We will be launching it next year, so I'm gonna edit it up and then send you the final version of it. Yes.
Thanks for
Cool.
Thank
organizing
you,
it, Norma.
Norma. Yeah,
Thank you. It was so nice catching up with you guys. Oh, you are everywhere and not here. I miss you.
You brought us together from 3 continents.
Hey, hey. It's a big deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
and I think that's okay. I want to add to that, it's because it's something that I've become also increasingly passionate about. South Africa's got a big diaspora across the world, and I think we don't always
Yeah.
tap so much into that. I think quite often we've got this reactive attitude of being like, oh, somebody has left, so I'm not happy about them leaving. Make me feel bad about being here. It makes me feel like I shouldn't be here or something. And that's rubbish. I think we need to tap much more into, there's so much goodwill for South Africa everywhere in the world. And I think we need to tap into that and say, hey, there are all these people that want to help, that want to contribute again. So I think it's really great that we managed to dial in from